Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, She Says Happiness. I'm Mary Ellen, and this is where I basically share with you my sewing journey, the things that I've been up to, what I'm making, what I'm buying, anything that is related to my sewing journey. Today is a different video. It's not something I've done before. Saying that, I've only been here for about a month, and I just thought I'd share with you the makings of the Patina Blouse. It's a pattern by Friday Pattern Company. You can see a version of it just here behind me. I made it at the weekend and I'm absolutely in love with it. So much so that I had a lovely fabric that was sent to me as a gift by my friend Lisa, and I thought it would be perfect to sew this fabric up as a patina blouse. Now, just before I get started, I'm just going to say that this video will be recorded over the week. I am really busy at the moment in terms of, I'm working full time. I also have some voluntary commitments that take up a lot of my time as well. And then, when you add in owning 3 dogs and having to look after them and also having, family life, I don't sew a lot of the time in continuous bouts. I just kind of sew in the stolen moments of the day. So whether that be first thing in the morning or after work or last thing at night. Today, I'm not that long home from work, and it's 5 to 7 in the evening, and there's still quite a lot of things I have to do in terms of chores and dinner and things like that, but I do carve out a little bit of time every day to do something that is sewing related. So yesterday, Monday, I did the preparation for my sewing this evening, and I cut out my pattern pieces. I stay stitched, so you can see here hopefully. I've stay stitched the necklines. I have on my front bodice pieces sewn in my darts and pressed those. I've interfaced my collar and my facing pieces, so everything is ready for me to go. And I probably only have about 20 minutes this evening, but they're 20 minutes that I'll be able to make the most use out of. Sunday evening I spent the time making a couple of adjustments to my pattern. So this was after I made the blouse. That's not to say I hadn't toiled it. I absolutely did, and in a previous video I talked about that toile, and basically the only real adjustment I had made was to make a narrow shoulder adjustment. And actually, if that was the only adjustment I ever made, it would be perfectly fine. But what I did discover, in fact I shortened it. I should mention that as well. I have actually shortened the pattern pieces by 2 inches. I'm 5'1" for reference, and that's where I just prefer my blouses to sit. But I made this at the weekend, and as much as I love it, and actually it fits really, really well, I just think I need to allow a little bit more room at the bust. I'm not talking a lot of space because there's no gape or anything like that. I just think another ½ inch or an inch or so would have made such a big difference, because as you all know, when you wear one bra or another, you find that everything sits slightly differently. And if I was to choose to wear a bra that wasn't a minimizer, which I do like to wear, I think I might actually benefit from having a little bit more room built into my blouse. So as you can see from this hot mess here, I have made just a slight adjustment, and you can see in these spaces here that I've just kind of backed up, there is just a wee bit more room that I have built into the pattern. Now, I'm going to be honest, because I have been sewing for less than 2 years, I'm not an expert, and I had never actually performed a full bust adjustment, there goes my iron, a full bust adjustment on a long pattern piece. I'd only ever done so on a bodice piece, but because of a blouse having a little bit more length, I wasn't sure what to do. So I made, firstly, an educated guess, and it was only actually after having performed this that I checked out if I was actually doing the right thing. So my gut instinct was correct, however, and you basically turn your bodice piece into a shorter bodice to perform the full bust adjustment. So you can see here, and I'll just fold it up, there's a line, and that's where I actually cut off the bottom part of this blouse front piece, and I only performed the full bust adjustment on this part because I wasn't for building room into the whole pattern piece. I just needed the room built into this area, so I worked only off this area, and I performed the full bust adjustment as I would any other. And in this case, because I was only creating a tiny amount of space, I didn't bother putting a dart in to take that excess width out, because I don't think, I mean, I don't even have a ruler sitting here, they're all over there. I think that's like maybe 3/8 of an inch. So it's not huge, and I'm not gaining an awful lot overall, so I just left it like that. And then after I did the FBA and built in the space and evened out the bodice just by cutting that a little bit off and bringing it down, evening it out, I also trued my dart. I then added on, just by sticking them both together again, the bottom part of my blouse pattern piece. So it was actually a really easy adjustment to make. It is just an FBA with a wee bit of the length taken off. So that is the adjustments that I've made to the pattern. I am going to start sewing up this evening, and before I started recording, before I basically decided to create this video, I got my collar pieces, and I already had them interfaced, remember? And there's one that is not interfaced, so top collar, bottom collar. And I have joined the collar pieces together just at the center seam, and I'm now going to sew with the right sides together my collar pieces. So let's get started. The seam allowance on the Patina blouse is 3/8 of an inch. I'm just going to sew the whole way around the outer collar, making sure to pivot at 3/8 of an inch allowance. Perfect. I've also pinned my collar together, and one of the tips, especially when working with lightweight fabrics that are liable to pluck, is to only ever put your pins through the actual seam allowance. That way you're not damaging the fabric pieces that are going to be visible on the final garment. Hopefully you can hear me over the noise of the machine. I'm actually using a sharp needle to sew this because, again, I want to minimize any possibility that I will snag my fabric. Always, 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 of course, remembering to use a new needle. There is always that temptation, you know, when you've just moved on to a project after creating something with a very, very similar fabric, there's a slight temptation to not bother changing the needle and it'll be okay. But that is a mistake, and one that I learned fairly early on in my sewing career. So I have sewn my collar together on the outside. Just going to trim off those threads, and now I'm just going to go and trim off the seam allowances to about 1/4 of an inch and turn it right side out and press it. Okay, so here we are. And I know what you're thinking, you're like, that doesn't look very pressed. It's not. Actually, the only parts of this that I have pressed are just here at the ends with the notches and the straight lines. The notches? The points and the straight lines. I'm thinking of notches because actually that's one of the other things I have done inside with the seam allowance. If I just show you here, let me see. So hopefully you can see I have notched into the seam allowance, which is just going to make that curve sit really, really nicely. Now, that is what the pattern instructions tell you to do, but that is not where I stop when it comes to sewing the collar piece. I don't know why that this is a step that's missed out on the pattern, but for me, when I make a collar, I always understitch, always. And I think, you know, understitching itself is basically a way of pre-pressing things into place. And so I am actually going to understitch the entirety of this curve, because it's just going to make this sit much, much better and have a wee bit more longevity. Now, you will never get right into the very point of the collar, so just start where it is the most comfortable without any of the fabric bunching up. And on this specific pattern, you're going to be understitching the facings to the underside, which is the non-interfaced side. Okay, so I am stitching probably less than 1/8 of an inch away from my seam line. I'm just taking my care to do this nicely because I don't like a line that isn't uniform. I think especially when you're making a blouse that has a collar, you know, the collar is such a focal point of that blouse. In fact, it's probably its main feature. You want to make sure it is on point. And when I'm understitching, I do just try to hold the two opposing pieces of fabric as taut as I possibly can, and that's what helps you achieve a really crisp edge. Okay, that's probably as far as I need to go. Backstitch and cut. And actually this is the point at which I'm really going to press my collar. So I'm going to do that and then I will be back. Okay, so that's my collar, which I can now set aside until I need it. I'm going to pop that over there out of the way, and I'm going to turn my attention then to the facing. So your facing will come in two pieces, which you will join together here at the center back. And then your pattern instructions will tell you that your next step is to stitch the whole way around the facing at a slightly wider length than usual. And that's going to enable you to use that guide as a pressing line. So I'm going to do that. And I'm just going to increase my stitch to about 3.5 to 4. And I'm going to run a press line the whole way around my facing, 3/8 of an inch. And when I've done that, there's a couple of things I need to do before I press. I just need to cut into that notch where you can see the shape diverges to make sure it presses nice and neatly into place. And I just press that, and then that's ready for the next step. So I'll go do that. Okay, so I've done that. I have got the facing pressed in, which is going to help when I come to stitch it down later on. And now we start working on the construction of the main blouse itself. So the first step then that you want to do is join together the blouse fronts to the yoke, one of the yokes. So right sides together, I have my yoke and I have my front bodice pieces. Remember, I've already stitched in my darts, so they're ready to go. And all of these things have been stay stitched. Now, because this is only the first of the yoke pieces, I'm going to stitch it in there at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay. Okay, so that is the yoke put in. Now I want to turn this around so that the wrong side of my front bodice pieces are facing me, and I'm going to pin in the other yoke, this time with the right side of the yoke facing the wrong side of the bodice. So basically what you're doing here is sandwiching your two front bodice pieces in between the yokes, and I'm being very careful here to sandwich them and use my pins just in the seam allowance of the 3/8 of an inch. So essentially, if your front pieces weren't there, you would have your yokes right sides together. So they're just sandwiched in, and now I'm going to stitch all 3 layers together at 3/8 of an inch. And honestly, I cannot begin to tell you how much I needed this little sewing slot in my evening after the day I've had at work. Work would be a wonderful, wonderful thing if it wasn't for people. I did really love working from home when my most immediate colleague interaction was with my dogs. Absolutely superior to people in every way. So that's the main construction done for those pieces. Now what I need to do is get my back, that's my sleeves, get my back piece, and just at the top I should have, there they are. So I should have 2 notches, and in between those notches I'm going to create gathering stitches. So I'm going to run 2 lines of gathering stitches. You could probably get away with 1 on a fabric that is this lightweight, but that second one just helps with getting an equal spread of gathers, I find. And then I'm going to take my back yoke. So there's now 2 yoke pieces. One is the inner, one is the outer. I just want the back yoke. And with it facing up, right side up, I'm going to take my gathered back and attach it to the yoke, matching the notches and just staying within my seam allowance there. Then I'm going to stitch those together. So here we have something that's starting to resemble a blouse. So there's my front bodice pieces, there is the internal yoke, and the other side there are my little gathers attached to the back yoke, and there's one of my little gathering threads poking out, so I'm just going to snip those off and delicately throw the threads to the floor. Really, really bad habit. The thing is, however, I do clean up between every project, so it never gets that bad, and I have ensured that I do have a wooden flooring in my craft room and not carpet, because I can't imagine what it would look like having to sew in a room that had carpet. So the next part then is the burrito method, and I'll explain how that works in just a second. I'm going to go and make a start in dinner and then come back and pick up where I left off. So I know some people get quite confused with the burrito method, so just to show you the way in which I've laid out these pattern pieces. So I have the back of my blouse sitting right side facing up, with the front pieces right side against those, okay? And all I'm going to do is roll, just like the burrito, my pieces up, okay? So that I come here to my yoke and I can attach my yoke pieces together. There are notches hiding here somewhere. Okay, there and there. So you should have a wrong side facing your right side. And now you're just going to stitch that in place. Total game changer. I learned this method firstly when I started sewing men's shirts, and I've made quite a few of those now for my other half. My yokes have been sewn up together. All I need to do now is pull out the main body from the center, which isn't that difficult to do. Okay, and presto! You can see there are my yokes, outer and inner. So all I need to do with these now is give them a nice press just to make those seams lie nice and flat, and then I can progress. This is a good time, by the way, if you want to add a label to your garment just here on the back yoke to sew that in while you still have an open neckline there, which just causes a lot of faffing or hand stitching a wee bit later on. I think I will put one in. So I've got the trusty label box out, and I could look and choose one really carefully, or I could just go for one of my very, very favourite labels, which I will show you now. This is a label from Little Rosy Cheeks, and it is one of my very favourites. If I can just get that to focus. There you are, Love Yourself Revolution. So I'm going to stitch that into my garment. So, okay, that's that done. So the next step then is to stitch the collar in. And this is probably where I am going to finish for the evening. Dinner should be ready. I'm getting pretty hungry. So you'll find you've got a notch there on the back neckline, which meets up with the middle of the collar. Just bear in mind that you are supposed to have your interface side of the collar facing up, and it's really easy for me to tell which that is because I've understitched, so my understitch side is going face down. And I am just taking the care to make sure I do not go outside my 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so my collar has now been pinned in, and I'm just going to stitch that in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You know, this is where you kind of see it really starting to come together, and it's not a difficult pattern at all by any means. I think this is a pattern that sewists of any ability should feel confident in picking up, and even if you haven't put a collar in before, hopefully you'll see there's absolutely nothing to be scared of. So just keeping my stitching line that 1/4 inch, making sure I get no puckers underneath the collar as well. And that is the collar set in. So yeah, as I say, you can kind of see this coming together, you know. I have the facing to sort out, I have the sleeves to put in, and actually the sleeves are put in flat lay, which is going to be really, really easy. And yes, I think actually I'm going to leave it there. Hi again, so I'm back where I left off last night, and yeah, I actually have Wednesday off when I work on a Saturday, so I'm off today, and I spent the morning quite leisurely actually, catching up with some friends, drinking a lot of coffee, and I've even read a few chapters of my latest read, which I might share with you a bit later on when I finished it and know a little bit more about what's happening, because it is sewing related, as are a lot of the novels that I am reading these days. So because I made a rookie error and didn't put my camera back on charge last night, I've actually made a little bit of a head start as to where I was. So when I left last night, I had just got the collar sewn in. I'm now at the point where I've actually sewn the facing in as well. I've done the work of trimming and notching around the neckline, and I've also, which I can show you here, understitched the two front sections of the blouse. There's nothing complicated there, so you haven't missed any tips or tricks or anything like that. And really all I'm going to do now is take my facing, which I've now pressed down and back, and I am going to top stitch that in place the whole way around the blouse. So I'll come back when I've done that. And so that is that done. Essentially all you're doing is edge stitching on the facing, and then you have your gorgeous stitching for the front of the blouse, for your buttonhole and button band. And that's pretty much it. At this point you can give your fabric a little steam just to get the collar to sit nicely in place. And I haven't done it yet, but I will do it later. Just because you should do something at a certain point doesn't mean I do. So the next step then is to put in the sleeves, and I am making the easier option, I suppose. I'm just making a short sleeve version of this blouse. I don't really like long sleeved blouses, and if you're making the long sleeve, there's obviously a few different things you have to do. There's cuff and things there to worry about, but in my case there's nothing like that to worry about. I've gone ahead and I've put in a couple of rows of gathering stitches for my sleeve, and I am now just going to set it in place. Now, one of the things about this pattern which makes it really, really easy is the fact that you are putting your sleeve in flat lay. So, you know, you're not setting your sleeve in, and it really is very, very simple. And I'm just looking for my notches as I go. It is a really, really easy blouse. I won't be sewing for too long today. I know it is my day off, but I do have a lot of chores and things that need to be done, so I'll be spending a bit of time on those. So I'm going to pin that, sew it up, and do the same for the other side. So the sleeves are in. You can see here, even though it's not closed up yet, that there's a wee bit of gatherings. There's a slight puff there in the sleeve. It's also a really loose sleeve, so that actually cuts out any need to do a full bicep adjustment, which is something I painfully generally have to do on most patterns. So now all that remains to do in terms of the sleeves and the main body itself is to join the seams at the sides, both at the sides and the arms. And the way in which this is done is literally just like you would work with a stretch fabric. So this is the first pattern I've ever used that's intended for woven fabrics that uses this methodology of setting in a sleeve. I've never set in a woven sleeve in this manner. It's always something I will do when I'm working with stretch patterns. So I was a bit skeptical. I thought it was a bit strange, but actually it works really, really well, and it makes this a very easy and satisfying sew. So I'm just pinning up both sides, and then I'm going to stitch them into place. And then really after I've done this, all that remains to do is hem the arms and the bottom of the blouse, and then sort out the buttons and buttonholes. So I'm going to stitch these sides together. Just make sure my dart stays pressed down. I hate it when you get a little bit of a dart that's just kind of popped up. It really bugs me. Don't know why. And then at the underarm seam, keeping that pin in as long as possible to ensure my little seams stay really close together. Slight pivot. Yep, both seams are pointing in the right direction towards the bodice. And then repeat with the other side. So once I have done that, I've literally just gone ahead and overlocked. I'm going to press those seams now to the back of the blouse, and really all I need to do now is edge stitch the hem on my sleeves. I'm going to fold up by 3/8 of an inch twice and edge stitch those. And then, because there is a curve actually on the bottom of my blouse, I'm going to do a 3/8 of an inch running stitch like we did for the facing, and then press that in place, fold over again, and just edge stitch that as well. So you don't need to see that. I'm going to skip that part and get on then to the buttonholes and things like that. Okay, so I've now got to the part where I am going to put in my buttonholes. I have marked them on the fabric just with a little bit of a chalk marker, and the pattern calls for 4 buttons. I'm actually putting in 5 just to ensure I have that coverage across the bust area. I've brought them all a bit closer together. So the buttons I'm using, you can see here, are just these lovely deep burgundy round buttons. Again, they were sent to me by my friend who sent me this beautiful fabric, Lisa, so thank you to Lisa. And I'm just going to pop those there into my buttonhole foot. So on this machine, I'm very lucky, and I have several buttonhole settings. The one that I'm going to use is just the preset that is the quick button on my machine. It works really, really well for me, and all I'm going to do is decrease the stitch length slightly because it's quite a delicate fabric that I'm working on. I'm going to bring down my stop, and this does all of the work for me. So I'm going to start down here just at the bottom and then work my way up. So pop that in, off I go. Tug. Sometimes my threads get caught in there, and let me just bring this forward for you to see. Is it going to focus or not? Sometimes it's hard for me to see from a distance, but hopefully you can just see my buttonhole. 2 seconds. It's pretty flawless. All I need to do now is reinforce that and cut it open. Before I do that, of course, I have 4 others to do. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to come back to you. So, off I go. Center. That's that. So I'll just trim off any little threads that are hanging off there. I will stick some of my fray check on it, and then I'll hand stitch the buttons on later on. It's actually lunchtime, so that's what I'm going to go and do now. Well, there we are, viewers, friends. I have finished my Patina blouse. It is, however, after 10 p.m. on Wednesday evening, but chipping away a little bit every day, I do have my final garment. So I do get asked quite a lot how I make time in my schedule to sew, and really it is a case of self-prioritizing. I do have busy work days, I do have my full and tight commitments, I do have my life, my family, my partner, my dogs, but I do carve out, whether it's 10-20 minutes or an hour on any given day, just to focus on my hobby and the thing that makes me happy. So yeah, from making those adjustments on my pattern pieces on Sunday night to hand stitching my buttons on while I chatted with my dear friend Lisa this afternoon over Zoom, we have our finished blouse. So thank you so much if you have come along with me on this journey. I just thought it would be something different to have a bit of a sew with me video up here. And if you've subscribed to my channel, thank you. If you haven't, please do subscribe, it would mean a lot to me. And if you hit that little notification bell, you will be notified the next time I upload a video, which will hopefully happen when I'm not just as tired. So good night from me, happy stitching, take care. Bye.